Arlo Beck mopped floors in a hangar where private jets cost more than every house on his block combined. His 6-year-old sat in the security office, holding a one-eyed stuffed donkey named Cricket to her ear, the way she always did when a room got too loud. On the other side of the glass, 15 aviation specialists had spent 6 hours failing to start the CEO's Gulfstream. They had tablets, fault trees, engineering degrees, and a replacement part grounded by the blizzard. They had everything except the one thing that mattered, a pair of ears trained in a military motor pool to hear what machines leave out when they are lying. Arlo Beck pushed through the side door of Hangar 3 with his daughter on his hip, and the blizzard shoving at his back like it had a personal interest in keeping him outside. Elowen had her face buried against his neck, one arm hooked around a navy blue stuffed donkey missing its left button eye, and 2 fingers of her other hand threaded through the cuff of his coat, the way she always held on. Not his hand, never his hand, because his hands were usually dirty and she had learned that before she could spell it. The hangar swallowed them. Fluorescent light hummed off a concrete floor polished to the dull shine of institutional pride, and in the center of it sat a Gulfstream, G650 with snowmelt streaking down its belly in dark, crooked lines. 15 people moved around the aircraft like ants around a queen that refused to wake. Tablets glowed. Tool carts rolled. Somebody under the tail section was calling out fault codes the way a medic reads vitals. Fast, clipped, expecting someone else to act on each number. Arlo set Elowen down near the security vestibule and knelt to zip her coat higher. Cricket, the donkey, hung from her fist by one ear, its yellow ribbon trailing against the floor. "That plane looks like it got brought inside because it was scared of the snow," Elowen said. "Machines do not get scared. People do." She considered this. Then she pressed Cricket's head against her own ear, listening to whatever the donkey had to say about it. Nabil Qureshi was scraping ice from the inside edge of the vestibule door with the corner of his plastic badge card, cursing under his breath in a way that was more habit than anger. He looked up when Arlo came through and nodded once, the way men nod who know each other's schedules better than each other's birthdays. "Lynette called," Arlo said. "School van stalled on Route 17. She cannot keep Elowen." "So she is here." "She is here." Nabil looked down at Elowen, who was already arranging Cricket on the security desk beside a paper cup of cold coffee. "I will make cocoa," he said. "The real kind, not the powder." Arlo pulled his mop from the utility closet. The bucket's caster wheel squeaked, a small, embarrassing sound in a building full of machines worth more than every house on his block combined. Out on the hangar floor, Rocco Bellamy was dragging orange safety cones away from the main door before the wind knocked them across the ramp. "CEO's jet," Rocco said, thumbing toward the G650. "A PU will not start. 15 people on it since 4 o'clock. The second failed start attempt happened while Arlo was wringing the mop. The auxiliary power unit tried to catch. The starter motor whined, rising through its normal pitch. And then nothing. No ignition. No turbine spool. The cluster of engineers around the tail section shifted. Tablets came up. Fault trees refreshed. Arlo's hand stopped on the mop handle. He had heard what was missing. The solenoid, the electromagnetic relay that should engage before the ignition module fires, had not clicked. Not a weak click. Not a late click. No click. The start sequence had skipped a step, and the computer had blamed the step after it. He stood still for 1 second too long. Greer Haskins was kneeling on a clean mat beneath the forward avionics panel, her tablet balanced on her knee, calling out fault tree branches to 2 technicians. She did not look up. Preston Vale did. Preston stood at the edge of the taped maintenance zone with his arms folded over a clipboard he had not written on in 20 minutes. He controlled shift assignments, vendor invoices, and who got to stand inside the tape. "Mr. Beck," Preston said, "the floor is your aircraft tonight." Elowen appeared at the edge of the vestibule hallway, Cricket tucked under her chin. "Dad heard something," she said. Nobody answered her. Margot Rell, who had been standing near the conference room door with a phone pressed to her ear and a posture that suggested the person on the other end controlled her career, looked at the child and then at the janitor, and then went back to her call. Arlo dipped the mop back into the bucket and pushed it forward. Lynette Sable's voice came through his phone, tinny and strained, with children shouting behind her and sleet ticking against glass. The school van was not moving. The district bus was an hour out. Elowen was his for the night. In the utility closet, Elowen counted the coins in his coat pocket on the floor beside him. 37 cents, arranged in a line by size. The broken mop handle he had been meaning to wrap leaned in the corner, and Arlo opened the old canvas tool roll from the bottom shelf to retrieve electrical tape. The roll was military surplus, faded olive, with a stitched name tag turned inward. Inside, copper wire in 3 gauges, a pair of crimpers, a voltage pen, tape in black and red, a stubby flathead, and 6 labeled bits in a plastic case. "Cricket says the little wire pieces are not trash if you know where they go," Elowen said. Cricket was pressed to her ear. Cricket has opinions. On the hangar floor, the 3rd start attempt failed identically. The replacement ignition module, ordered from Atlantic City, was grounded by the runway closure. Greer pulled off her headset. The fault tree made no sense because the module was not receiving a clean start signal. Arlo stood just outside the tape, close enough to hear Greer tell a technician the upstream path looked clean on the diagnostic, but the sequence was wrong. Margot had come off her call and was standing 3 feet from him, with the focused impatience of a woman whose career was being grounded alongside the aircraft. "Your daughter said you heard something," Margot said. The solenoid did not engage before the ignition attempt. The computer logged ignition failure, but the ignition module never got permission to fire. Preston was already walking toward them. Greer looked up. "It is not failing after ignition. It is failing before permission." Preston arrived in 3 strides. "Mr. Beck is our night custodial and utility porter. He is not part of the maintenance event." He turned to Arlo with a voice that was polite, in the way locked doors are polite. "Thank you. Please return to your duties." Arlo returned to his duties. The mop squeaked. Preston found him in the back corridor beside the parts cage. The hallway was empty except for the hum of the cage's wire mesh under the ventilation and the distant thud of the wind testing the hangar's south wall. "Arlo." Preston used the first name the way supervisors do when they want the conversation to feel human without being equal. "You have been here, 14 months? 16? 16 months. Good record. Clean. No incidents." Preston adjusted his cuffs. On the left one, near the button, a fine dust of green oxide, the kind that copper leaves on fabric when corroded copper is handled without gloves. Arlo saw it the way he had once seen sand in engine housings, where sand should not have been. Not by searching, but because his eyes were trained to notice what did not belong. "Take the week," Preston said. "Paid. Go home. Take your daughter. Wait out the storm. Fathers should know when to protect steady work." "I did not do anything that requires protection." "You spoke to a client about a maintenance event you have no credentials to assess. That is a note I would rather not write." "I was not inside it. I was listening to it." Preston leaned closer. His breath was coffee and something metallic, like a man who had been biting the inside of his cheek. "Take the week, Arlo. Go home before someone asks why a janitor was inside a maintenance event." The door at the far end of the corridor opened. Rocco Bellamy came through with a parts request form in one hand and stopped when he heard Preston's tone. The form stayed at his side. Rocco looked at Arlo and then at Preston and then at the floor, and he stood there the way people stand when they have walked into a room they wish they had not entered but cannot leave without making the silence worse. Preston did not acknowledge him. Arlo reached for the radio clipped to his belt. "Nabil, is Elowen still warm?" Nabil's voice, flat and sure. "She is drawing a plane with socks on. She is fine." Arlo looked at Preston. "I will finish my shift." He said nothing about the cuffs. Elowen had crawled under the security console to rescue Cricket, who had slipped behind a tangle of cable bundles and wedged herself between a power strip and the wall. The yellow ribbon was caught around a cable tie. Arlo knelt on the floor and unwound it gently, the way he unwound things, with patience that had nothing to do with the object's value and everything to do with the way his hands worked when they were not being watched. He checked Elowen's fingers. Warm. "Cricket wanted to see where the wires go," Elowen said. "Cricket should ask before exploring." "You never ask before exploring." That stopped him for a moment. Margot Rell appeared in the doorway. She had come to ask Nabil a question about building access during the storm, and she stopped when she saw Arlo on his knees with his daughter's small hands between his, a one-eyed donkey on the floor between them, and an expression on his face she had not seen him wear, tender and unguarded, and lasting exactly as long as it took him to notice her standing there. "He does not hit things," Elowen said, looking at Margot with the directness of a child who has decided an adult needs information. "He waits until they tell him where it hurts." Margot looked at Arlo's hands, the burn scar across the left one, the close-trimmed nails, the calluses that had nothing to do with mopping, and then at the security monitors behind him, where the G650 sat unmoving under its cloud of engineers. "I have a question for your father," Margot said. Elowen handed Cricket to Arlo. "Take Cricket. She knows how to listen." Greer Haskins let Arlo talk without calling it a diagnosis. They stood at the maintenance terminal near the hangar office, Greer with her tablet open to the fault tree, Arlo with Cricket still in his hand because he had not found a place to set her down, Rocco standing behind them the way a man stands when he wants to help, but fears who might see him helping, and Margot off to one side with her arms crossed and her phone finally in her pocket. "Walk me through what you heard," Greer said. She did not say she believed him. She said, "Walk me through," which was a different kind of invitation, the kind an engineer extends when she has run out of her own ideas and needs to hear someone else's before she can reject or accept them. "The start sequence has a specific order," Arlo said. "Power to the starter motor, solenoid engagement, then ignition. You should hear the motor spool, then a click, a hard mechanical click when the solenoid relay closes, and then the ignition fires and the turbine catches. What I heard was the spool, and then silence. No click. The computer logged ignition failure because it never saw combustion, but the ignition module never received the command to fire because the solenoid never closed the circuit." Greer looked at him. "If the solenoid ground path is compromised, the relay cannot fully engage. The computer sees no ignition because the ignition module never receives the start command," Arlo said. "Every module you replace will test fine on the bench and fail on the aircraft because the bench has its own clean ground." Greer entered a search in the maintenance log. A note appeared, dated 11 weeks prior. "Green oxidation observed at APU starter ground lug, monitor." The language was dry and standard. The implication was not. That note should have generated a work order, because corrosion on a ground path is not cosmetic. It is an electrical disease that gets worse with moisture and temperature cycling, and Teterboro had given it 11 weeks of both. "Who entered this?" Greer asked. Rocco shifted his weight but did not answer. 20 seconds later, the note vanished from the shared tablet display. Greer refreshed. Gone. She refreshed again. Still gone. Nabil's voice came over the radio, quiet and specific. The terminal login that deleted it was Preston Vales. Timestamp 40 seconds ago. Greer stared at the empty log field. "A bad ground can throw a clean lie." "Bad grounds usually do," Arlo said. Margot had not spoken. She was standing with her phone at her side, and for the first time all night she was not holding it like a weapon or a leash. She was holding it like something she had forgotten she was carrying. Through the glass partition behind the terminal, the security office was visible. Elowen was sitting on the floor with her legs crossed and Cricket in her lap, drawing on the back of a printed flight manifest that Nabil had given her. The drawing appeared to be a plane wearing boots. She was using a pen that was too large for her hand, and she held it the way her father held tools, with her whole grip, not delicately, as if the instrument were something to be trusted with force rather than coaxed with finesse. The APU access bay beneath the tail was cramped, cold, and loud, with wind vibrating through the hangar's seams. The fluorescent work light clamped to the access ladder through hard shadows that shifted when the building flexed. Captain Amos Breck stood under the left wing in a wool overcoat, holding a paper checklist folded into fourths, despite every other person in the building relying on a screen. He was the senior contract pilot assigned to the CEO's flight, and he had the particular authority of a man who could ground an aircraft with one sentence, and had done so before. He trusted paper because paper did not update itself when someone needed it to say something different. Margot had briefed him in the corridor. Breck had listened without interrupting, asked 2 questions, one about the meter readings and one about who had authorized the panel inspection, and then walked to the aircraft without waiting for anyone to lead him. "Show me," Breck said. The panel came off under Greer's hands with the careful speed of someone who remembered every fastener location. Arlo crouched beside her on the access platform, which was barely wide enough for 2 people and smelled like hydraulic fluid and cold aluminum. He pointed without touching. The grounding wire at the starter solenoid was coated in green oxide, not surface tarnish, not a film, but deep corrosion that had eaten into the copper braid until the individual strands had fused into a single brittle mass. The clamp lug had turned the color of a penny left in vinegar, and the contact surface where metal should have pressed clean against metal was powdered and pitted. A small stalactite of oxidation had formed beneath the lug where moisture had pooled and frozen and thawed across weeks of New Jersey winter. Greer placed a multimeter lead on each side of the connection. She pressed firmly to ensure contact through the oxide layer. The resistance reading came back more than 30 times what the circuit required, a number so far from specification that Greer did not need to explain it. She showed the display to Captain Breck without commentary. The number spoke for itself. "The ignition module is fine," Greer said. "The ground path is not, has not been for weeks." The replacement module was still hours from arriving and would not have fixed anything. The CEO's office had called 3 times. The merger signing in Toronto was in 11 hours. Margot's phone buzzed again, and she silenced it without looking. Captain Breck folded his checklist tighter. "No taped miracle flies my airplane." "It does not fly," Arlo said. "It proves where the truth is." Elowen's yellow ribbon was still caught on Arlo's sleeve from the security office, where Cricket's rescue had left it wrapped around his cuff button. It hung there like a small, bright flag that nobody noticed, and he did not remove it. The conference room had a glass wall facing the aircraft, and in it Preston Vale stood with a printed draft incident report that accused Arlo Beck of unauthorized access to a maintenance-controlled zone and potential contamination risk to a Part 135 operation. The paper was clean. The margins were even. The language was procedural in the way that procedural language becomes a weapon when the person writing it knows exactly which words trigger institutional reflexes. Ms. Rell authorized an unqualified individual to participate in a diagnostic event during a high-profile aircraft recovery, Preston read. His voice was steady and professional, the voice of a man who had learned that institutions listen to tone before they listen to content. The weather conditions combined with the client pressure created confusion that— "Stop," Margot said. That led to a well-intentioned but inappropriate— "I said stop." Greer set her tablet on the conference table, screen up, showing the multimeter photograph, the resistance value, and the time-stamped video of the corroded lug. She did not narrate it. Preston did not look at the tablet. He looked at Arlo. "There is no prior record of corrosion in that bay." "That is incorrect," Greer said. "There was a record. It was deleted from the shared system 11 minutes ago." Preston's expression did not change. It held its shape the way a crack holds a wall together, by not moving, by pretending the structure beneath it is still sound. "System errors happen during storms. Network instability. I can have IT pull the server logs if—" "Nabil already has the terminal access log," Margot said. Arlo felt the weight of the room, the glass wall with the G65 beyond it, the tablet with its evidence, the storm pressing against the building, the $19 an hour, the $112 in a coffee tin for school shoes that were separating at the sole, Elowen in the security office, drawing planes with socks. He felt all of it press against his chest, the way cold air presses against a window that has been holding it back for too long. "Do not put my daughter's supper inside your paperwork." Preston blinked. "You had a corrosion note," Arlo said. "It is gone now. I did not make it disappear." The room was quiet. Captain Beck uncrossed his arms and crossed them again, tighter. Outside the glass wall, the G650's tail section was still open, and the corroded wire was still visible under the work light, green and pitted and honest in a way that no report could rewrite. Preston stood with both hands on the back of a chair, and his knuckles were white, and the green oxide dust on his left cuff was still there, and Arlo watched him realize that everyone in the room had now seen it. The tail access bay again, rolling tool cart, wind groaning through the hangar door seals like something trying to get in. Elowen stood behind the yellow safety line with Cricket pressed against her ear, and Nabil stood behind Elowen with one hand near her shoulder, not touching, just present. Arlo opened the canvas tool roll on the cart. He removed 12-gauge copper wire, the crimpers, and a clamp rated for the lug size. He did not reach for the tape first. He reached for the wire, because the wire was the connection, and the tape was only there to keep the wire from chafing against the bracket where it curved. "Every step out loud," Greer said. Her tablet was recording. "Stripping 6 inches of 12-gauge solid copper." He pulled the wire through the stripper with 2 smooth passes. The bright metal underneath caught the overhead light like something that had been waiting to be uncovered. Forming a bypass loop from the solenoid ground terminal to the verified airframe ground point. He bent the wire into shape, crimped one end into the clamp, seated it, and checked the contact by touch and then by sight. His fingers were stiff from the cold. The access bay was open to the hangar's unheated upper volume, and he worked them open and closed twice before crimping the second end. "Contact confirmed at both terminals. Clamp torque by hand. I do not have a torque wrench rated for this lug." Greer handed him one from the tool cart, a snap-on 1/4-inch drive, nicer than anything in his canvas roll. He looked at it for half a second and set the torque to the specification without asking what it was. Greer watched his hands. They moved with the economy of a man who had done this work in worse conditions, in dust, in freezing rain, in the back of a convoy with engines running and time measured in minutes rather than hours, and who had learned that the fastest way to finish is to do each step once and correctly. Elowen shifted behind the safety line. She had Cricket pressed against her ear, and she was leaning forward the way she leaned forward when Arlo fixed things at home: the dryer belt, the bathroom faucet, the loose hinge on the front door, as if she needed to be close enough to hear the machine cooperate. Captain Beck stood at the base of the access ladder with his arms folded and his paper checklist in his breast pocket. "1 ground diagnostic start, not flight release. The aircraft does not move until a certified repair is completed and signed." "The tape is not the repair." Arlo wrapped strain relief around the wire where it curved past the bracket. "The wire is not permission. The meter is the answer." He stepped back. Greer placed the multimeter leads on the bypass connection. The resistance reading came back clean. A fraction of an ohm, the kind of number that means copper is touching copper with nothing in between. "Start sequence," Beck said. The APU engaged. The starter motor whined through its normal pitch, and this time the solenoid clicked. A clean, definite, mechanical click that had been missing all night. The sound of a relay closing the way it was supposed to close. And the ignition module fired. The turbine caught. It hesitated for one rotation, the way a cold engine hesitates when it has forgotten what warmth feels like. And then it spooled and settled into its operating frequency, with the steady hum of a machine doing what it was built to do. Warm air began to move through the aircraft's systems. Panel lights came alive in the cockpit above them. The hangar changed, not in temperature, not in light, in the quality of its silence. 15 people who had been moving and talking and typing for hours went still. A technician near the nose gear set down a tablet. Greer lowered the multimeter and looked at Arlo across the open panel, with an expression that was not surprise, but was the moment just before respect becomes permanent. Elowen lowered Cricket from her ear. Greer spoke first. She spoke to the room, and she spoke to the tablet's recording, and she spoke with the precision of a woman who understood that what she said now would be entered into a record that regulators, insurers, and attorneys would read for years. The APU ignition module was not the root cause. The root cause was a corroded ground connection at the starter solenoid, which prevented full relay engagement and generated a misleading ignition fault code. The corrosion was previously noted in a maintenance log entry dated 11 weeks ago. That entry was deleted from the shared system tonight. The room absorbed this. A technician near the back wall put his hands in his pockets and looked at the floor. The vendor representative from the ignition module supplier closed his laptop without saving whatever he had been typing. Greer waited until the room was still before she continued. The individual who identified the root cause is Arlo Beck, utility porter assigned to the night shift. He recognized the missing solenoid engagement by sound during the second failed start attempt and subsequently described the fault mechanism accurately and completely. Nabil set a printed access log on the nearest flat surface. The log showed Preston Vale's credentials used to delete the maintenance note 40 seconds after Greer had displayed it. The print was small and dense and undeniable. Margot picked up the log. She read it once, slowly. She set it down. "Mr. Vale," she said, "your badge." Preston removed his badge and placed it on the table with the precision of a man who still believed in the appearance of order, even when the order had collapsed around him. He did not look at Arlo as he left the conference room. He looked at the glass wall, at the aircraft beyond it, and his reflection passed across the G650's fuselage like a man walking out of a photograph of himself. Elowen crossed the hangar floor. She had come out of the security office on her own, and Nabil was following 10 steps behind her with his hands in his jacket pockets and the expression of a man who had decided to let a 6-year-old do what she was going to do. She walked past the safety cones and the tool carts and the engineers who stepped aside, without knowing why they were stepping aside for a child in a zipped coat with a stuffed donkey in her hand. She stopped in front of her father. Arlo's hands were trembling, not from cold and not from fear, from the specific exhaustion of a man who has held himself perfectly still for hours under weight that was never his to carry, and has only now been allowed to set it down. Elowen held out Cricket. Arlo took the donkey. He pressed her against his chest, and Cricket's remaining button eye caught the fluorescent light, and the yellow ribbon hung over his knuckles, and he held the small thing the way a man holds something that weighs nothing and means everything. "You fixed the part they could not see," Elowen said. "It was never hiding." The break room had a coffee machine that required exact change, and a window facing the ramp where a snowplow was pushing the first clear line through the gray dawn. Margot sat across from Arlo with 2 paper cups of coffee between them. Elowen was asleep on the break room couch with Cricket tucked under her chin and Arlo's coat spread over her, one arm hanging off the edge with her small fingers curled loose around nothing. Keziah's wool hat, the one Arlo kept in the glove box because Elowen still asked for it when the weather turned, had fallen from his coat pocket and lay on the cushion beside Elowen's head. He did not move it. It belonged near her. Greer had recommended Arlo by name for the ground support apprenticeship track. 12 months of supervised work leading to a maintenance certification, and a position that started at $31 an hour with full benefits and did not require him to work nights. She had written the recommendation on a maintenance tablet and emailed it to Margot before the coffee was poured, and the subject line read simply, "Beck, Arlo, ground support certification candidate." "What do you need to say yes?" Margot asked. Arlo looked at his daughter. She had kicked one shoe off in her sleep. The shoe lay on its side, scuffed at the toe from the playground, and the sole was beginning to separate from the upper on the left side in a gap wide enough to see daylight through. $112 in a coffee tin at home on the kitchen counter. He did not know if it was enough. $3.25 pickup, every weekday. Margot did not answer immediately. She picked up her coffee, set it down without drinking, and pulled out her phone. She typed something. Then she looked at him. The program hours are 7 to 3. You would be off-site by 3:10. Then yes. She nodded once. Not warmth. Recognition. The operational kind, where a person is entered into a system correctly for the first time. The security vestibule was bright with morning light for the first time in 16 hours. The plowed ramp stretched out beyond the glass like a fresh page. Nabil had made Elowen a paper visitor badge with Cricket's name written in block letters. Cricket Beck, authorized visitor, hangar 3. Elowen held the badge up to Cricket's remaining eye. Can she see it? She can see it, Nabil said. Rocco Bellamy came through the vestibule with a cinnamon roll wrapped in a napkin from the pilot lounge. He stopped in front of Elowen and looked at Arlo. May I? He asked. Arlo nodded. Rocco handed the roll to Elowen, who accepted it with the gravity of a diplomat receiving credentials. She tore a small piece and held it up to Cricket's mouth, then ate the piece herself because Cricket, she explained, had already had breakfast. Arlo slid his wedding ring from the small metal tray in his tool roll and put it back on his left hand. He always removed it before working on machines. Keziah had known that about him, had watched him do it 1,000 times in their kitchen and their garage, and the motor pool parking lot where she sometimes brought him lunch, and the return of the ring to his finger was the small private ritual that marked the end of every job. The band settled into its groove the way it always did, warm from being indoors, familiar from years of removal and return. Elowen tucked Cricket into Arlo's coat pocket, head first, with just the donkey's frayed ears and yellow ribbon showing above the edge. Cricket should ride where she can hear machines, Elowen said. Arlo buttoned the pocket halfway. Through the vestibule glass, the sun was hitting the wet ramp and turning it silver. Somewhere inside the hangar, the G650 sat grounded and waiting for a certified repair that would arrive by afternoon. Somewhere in a system that had not existed 12 hours ago, Arlo Beck's name was filed under a department that matched what his hands had always known how to do. Cricket says this place knows your name now, Elowen said. Arlo took his daughter's hand, her whole hand, because for the first time in 16 hours his hands were clean, and pushed through the vestibule door into the cold morning air. Then we better remember ours. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and stay for the next one. We are just getting started.